Today on episode 34 of the Play Guitar Podcast, I'm talking cool chords. Here are some of my favorite chords you can use to spice up your playing and add new textures to your sound. Also have listener feedback, so stay tuned. Welcome to episode 34 of the Play Guitar Podcast. I'm Lee, and this is the podcast that's determined to make you a better guitar player. No matter if you're just starting out or you've been playing for years, this is the show that will help you become the guitarist that you always wanted to be. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today on episode 34. Today, I want to go over chords, and not just any chords. We're talking cool chords. Well, what's that, you ask? You just hold on. That's where we're headed. But it's about the right time. It's about time. We've been talking about motivation and gear and guitar scales, and it's that time for chords. These are something that we play all the time and we need to pay special attention to. Is it enough to learn a few open position chords and be done with it? To say, okay, I know a few chords, I know enough to get by. Is it okay? Is that all right? Of course it is, if that's all you want out of the guitar. Strumming open position chords and being able to play simple songs is a great achievement for the beginner guitar player. Just to be able to strum a few chords and enjoy yourself, what's wrong with that? It's very relaxing. But what happens if that's not enough? What happens when you're ready to take that next step? What happens when you hear songs that you love and you want to play and you know those aren't the chords that I learned? Where do you go from there? Well, for some, it's the capo. That's right, the capo, the clamp. Being able to slide those same chords that you already know into different places on the guitar. It opens up different keys that you were not able to play in before. It's an instant game changer and it's super easy. You don't even really have to think too much. You just put the capo on, put it on a new fret, and go to town, man. Play those chords that you already know and you have new sounds. But what happens next? What happens when you can still hear that the chords that you're playing, well, they're not really in the songs that you're listening to? Well, where you go from there, the next step is the dreaded bar chords. Oh, woe and pain and misery when you're first learning bar chords, especially if you're playing acoustic guitar. But just when you thought, that pain and playing were distant memories from when you first started with your fingertips, finger and wrist pain starts to creep back into your guitar life again with bar chords. But once you get over that, and you get used to playing bar chords, that the basic bar chord shapes open up so many avenues for your playing. You can start to hear that you now have a lot of the sounds and a lot of the chords that are in the songs that you're listening to. And there you go, you're set. You are ready to rock. And if that's all you ever want to do, and if that makes you happy, more power to you. But what happens is, over time, your ear starts to get better. And as your listening skills improve over time, you may start to notice something else. That familiar feeling that your chords could be doing a lot more. What are those sounds? How are these people making those chords? Or you might see a guitar player playing a certain chord shape that you just know you're not familiar with. Whatever it is, you by this point start to realize that there's always something new to learn on the guitar. At first, when you realize this, it's kind of frustrating. You might feel a little defeated. This is never going to end. Every time I learn, feel like I've got a handle on this thing, something new comes up. But to me, that's what I love the most about the guitar. It never ends. There's always something new to learn. There's always a new pathway to explore. There's always something that rejuvenates my interest in learning this instrument. Well, today I'm going to explain and I'm going to play for you some of my favorite chords. Chords that are different than standard open chords and standard bar chords. Chords that you may have heard before but didn't realize what they were. And some of them are actually super easy to play. Not all of them though. Some of them are more difficult. But all of them sound very cool. And they're ready for you to insert those into your playing, ready to take your chord playing to the next level. And I think this is going to be a lot of fun. It's about time we did this. And I think it can be super helpful for you. And I'm very excited to bring this to you today. So I'm going to say thanks again for joining me today. And we're going to go ahead and get started with the main topic. Cool sounding chords. Okay. Chords are fun. That's right, I said it. Chords are fun. Not everything has to be super fast lead guitar. Sometimes just playing a really interesting chord progression can be completely satisfying. Anyone that's played in bands for a while knows the majority of your time playing in the band is playing rhythm, playing chords. Even if you're the lead player, you're the designated lead player. Sure, you might play some lead fills every once in a while, but finding your place along with the other chord players in the band, it can be just as interesting as playing lead guitar. Think of it this way. Most likely your band has some sort of rhythm player already if you're the lead guy, and he or she is usually playing the meat and potatoes chords of the songs, the chords that need to be there, the basic chords that they provide the foundation of the structure of the song. And if you were just to copy those same chord voicings, just double what the other player is playing, well, that's leaving a lot left on the table. By the very nature of how chords work, there are so many different ways to enhance the way the chords of the song are played. And this leaves you in a very cool spot. When it's not your time to play lead, but the foundational chords are already covered, this gives you time to create some very cool rhythm parts that are different from what the rest of the band are playing. Your chord voicings can be created in a different and interesting way. And the rhythms that you play don't have to be the same as well. They can be different and they can be complementary to the overall song. Have you ever heard a garage band? Usually high school kids, and they're getting a band together for the first time. And usually there's more than one guitar player. Usually everybody plays guitar. And usually all of the guitars are playing the exact same chords in the exact same way. And how does it sound? Well, it sounds loud most of the time, but it can sound muddy. And actually, by how thick and compressed that sound is with all those guitars playing those same things, it kind of gets kind of small, especially if you record it and listen back to it. There's a lot of information all being pumped out in the same exact frequencies. Now, on the other hand, think of a band that features two guitar players. The band that comes to mind for me right now is Aerosmith. They're playing hard rock most of the time, and the guitarists are both playing rhythm until it's time for the lead section. But pay attention to what each of the guitar players are playing. It's different. Usually they're playing at completely different places on the guitar, and they're playing the same chord progressions. They're not just slamming out the same exact chord shapes. And it sounds huge, and it sounds wide, and it sounds interesting. The guitarists have voiced their chords differently. Joe Perry on one side, Brad Whitford on the other. And they're playing different things, and they lock together. They're playing the same chords, but they're voiced in a different way in different areas of the guitar. So the more you get into chords and understanding how they work and how to manipulate them, the better you can sound. And it's not just even for being in a band. Even if you're a solo guitar player, having some really cool chords is it's a big advantage. And being able to take advantage of all that chords have to offer can keep a night of solo guitar very interesting. So we all have a chord or two that we love to play. You play this chord and it just sounds cool to you. It makes you feel good. And because of that, because it feels good, we try to throw it in as often as we can in all sorts of different songs. Well, I've got some of those. And today I want to share some of the chords that I love to play. There are so many cool and interesting chords. There's way too many for just one show. So we're going to consider this part one. I'm going to revisit this one time because there's a lot more. But what are we talking about here? What's the difference to the basic chords that we all learn in the beginning to some more advanced things? Well, there's nothing wrong with basic chords. They're great. I use them all of the time. They have built thousands and thousands of our favorite songs. And there's a reason for that. They sound really good. And having a solid understanding of basic chords, it's essential. And any chord can sound really cool in the right setting. I always think of Under the Bridge by the Chili Peppers. They have that E major seventh chord, the one that rings out while the drums are playing. I think it's like 2 measures. It's almost featured in that song. The E major seventh chord is not something that you hear in rock songs very often. It's usually in jazz or it's in easy listening songs. And it always floors me when I hear that song Under the Bridge, that it's featured and it sounds perfect just for that spot in the song. So let's talk about some cool chords, some chords that are different, that really speak to you and are a lot of fun to play. Here are some of the things that you deal with when you're moving forward with your chords. And these things directly apply to the chords we're going to hear today. So what can you do with some basic chords? You can add some extensions to those chords. Extensions are added color tones. You add them to the basic notes of the structure of the chord, and it kind of decorates them a bit. They sound different, but they still function the same. And those notes can be from the scale, or they can be some altered notes from the scale, depending on how much tension you want to bring in. Something else you can do, you can change the voicings of the chords. Voicings are different arrangements of the notes of the chords. Once you get into bar chords, you see, okay, well, I know an E down in open position, and now here's another E way up here at the 9th fret. They're both E chords, but they sound very different. They're voiced different. The notes are arranged in a different way. Another way you can get some different sounding chords is to use open tunings. Actually tuning the guitar differently than the standard E, A, D, G, B, E. I'm not going into those today because when you start doing open tuning chords, it's like opening Pandora's box. When you start manipulating chords in open tunings, you have to learn all. We'll get into that at another time. I'll focus on that at another time. But when you're new at open tunings, because the basic structure of the fretboard has changed, it's tough to know what you're dealing with. But on the flip side of that, once you understand how things work in an open tuning, you can create gorgeous chords. Take a listen to some old Michael Hedges tunes. Aerial Boundaries was a great one to listen to. So today we're going to take a look at some of my favorite cool chords. And this is how it's going to work. I'm going to introduce the chord. I'm going to talk about its uses. I'll play you the chord. I'll give you some instances where you can play them. But also on the show notes page, I'm going to have diagrams of every single one of these chords. And if you hear one that you like, or if something interests you, go on over to playguitarpodcast.com/034. And bam, right there, you're going to have all the chord boxes for you from the show today. The first time I started experimenting with chords other than normal chords, that was my junior year in university. We all had to perform a recital for our junior and our senior years. And I was into composing with computers way back then, so I wanted to combine that with my guitar playing. So for my recital, I wrote a bunch of instrumental tunes. And I sequenced all the MIDI parts, all the background parts. I used an old Commodore Amiga and Dr. T's software, dinosaur stuff. And all that controlled a Roland synth, and I pressed play, and I played live guitar over top of it from my recital. I was a jazz major, but these weren't jazz tunes. These were just tunes that I came up with that I liked, that they weren't necessarily jazz, but I wanted my chord voicings to be interesting. So I started getting into that. And I guess it came off more as like fusion guitar. I wasn't going for that. I was just happy to get the songs done for the recital. But I spent the time to really experiment with different ways of playing chords. And it worked. And some of the chords today are directly from that time, all those years ago, that was well spent experimenting with the chords. That was my starting point. And I've been using more interesting chords ever since. But let's take a look at these. Like I said before, some are simple and some are more complex. But these are some of the cool chords I enjoy playing. And one last thing before we get started with the playing, if you're unsure about how chords are constructed and would like to understand how chords work, go to playguitarpodcast.com/chords. I've got a blog post that really can get you understanding, giving you the basics to all of this. Okay, let's start off with a simpler one. This is the suspended fourth chord. You've seen it, sus4. This is the chord the Who, the band The Who, made a career out of this chord. All of their most famous songs have a bunch of suspended fourth chords in it. Bon Jovi, Wanted Dead or Alive, thousands of other songs that use a sus4 chord. How do you make a sus4 chord? Well, it's a major chord where you take the third, and if you know that's from the scale, first, third, and fifth, the note that's the third note of the scale that built the chord. You take that third note from a major chord and you raise it by 1 fret. We're going to do this one in E. Here's an E major chord. And we've got an E, a G sharp, and a B in E major. But all we're going to do is we're going to take that G sharp. If you've ever played an open position E chord, you've got your first finger at the first fret of the G string. We're going to raise that note up 1 fret. And here's what it sounds like. Sound familiar? And then I'll go back to the major chord. It should sound familiar, okay? The suspended chord, I use it all the time. You can use this, especially when I'm playing a song where you've got a major chord and you have to play it for a long time, like more than one measure, like 4 measures or something like that. Say I'm on a D chord. At this point, I add that suspended fourth to the chord. It doesn't change the function, and it just adds a little interest to that. Or in the key of E. Adds a little bit of interest. But that's not the only way you can use them. They can also add tension and kind of a floaty sound to like a fusion song or something like that. So there's a lot of different ways that you could use the suspended fourth chord. And go ahead and check out the diagram. I have the diagram of the E sus4. And this is one of the easier ones. But one of my favorite chords. I love suspended chords. Okay, let's move on to the next one. The next one we have is called an add 9 chord. Now, a lot of you have seen these add 9 chords and thought, well, is that a ninth? But it's not. A ninth chord It's kind of bluesy sounding. An add 9 chord isn't. And there's two different ones. There's the major at add 9, or just the add 9, and then there's a minor add 9. E. We're going to do E for these. So here is an E add 9. Let's take a listen to this. Pretty nice. Pretty nice. Here's a regular E chord. Nothing wrong with it. And here's an add 9. E add 9. Hear that note right there? It's very pretty. Basically, an E chord has 3 notes: E, G sharp, and B. Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to keep those 3 notes, but we're going to add a note into it, the 9th. So we've talked about this before. You give every note in the scale a number, and an octave from E to E, that would be 8. E, F sharp, G sharp, A, B, C sharp, D sharp, E. E would be 8, or where you would start counting at 1 again. But if you kept going from there, went 1 more, you would get another F sharp, just like the second note of the scale. So we're going to add that F sharp in there, the 9th. Give it an add 9 sound. And that's this note right here, the F sharp. Very pretty chord. Now let's do the same thing with a minor triad, a minor chord. Okay, here's E minor. Okay, just regular old E minor. Every time I play this, I think Pink Floyd for some reason. Wish you were here. Okay, E minor. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a minor triad. The notes from the E minor are E, G, and B. That G sharp from the major went back 1 to G to make it minor. E, G, B. And we're going to add that 9th again to that, which is an F sharp. And it sounds a little something like this. Little Metallica sound right there. The E minor add 9. Okay? They're some of my favorite chords. You get all sorts of really wonderful sounds from those. And they're easy. All we're doing is taking simple triads that you already know in open position and adding a note to them. You can play them anywhere we have a major or a minor triad. They'll work very well. It all depends on the style of the song. But go ahead and take a look at the diagrams on the show notes page if you'd like to incorporate those in your playing. They're pretty neat. Okay, so those are the easy ones. We're going to get past those. Now, I want to talk about using open strings. Have you ever played a chord and accidentally had some open strings with that chord and it sounded pretty cool? Maybe probably your high E string and your B string, they were kind of, you weren't pressing those strings down, they just kind of played and you thought, hey, that's very nice. Right now I'm playing major bar chords, but I'm leaving the high E and the B string open. It's a pretty sound. Back what I was talking to you about before, when I was getting songs ready for a recital, I love this sound. It's called a 1 major to a 2 major sound. Here's a little something like that. Have you ever heard that sound before? I'm playing an E major chord and then sliding it up 2 frets to some sort of an F sharp major chord with some of those open strings ringing. But it's one of my favorite sounds. And I was in a song that was in the key of A, and I wanted to use that idea. So here's my A chord, and that's just part of a bar chord at the 5th fret. And I raised it up 2 frets to make it a B chord. But I still kept that A in the bass. It's a neat sound. But it just wasn't what I was looking for. I wanted to have a different sound to it. I wanted to have some open strings ringing that really defined the chords a little bit more. So I've got these chords on the sheet, but here they are. The first one, it's just a B chord with an A in the bass. And I left the open A string, and I also left the open B string. Doesn't sound that good right there, but if you strum the whole chord, now I wanted to go back to an A chord. And this is an A add 9. This little note on the top, that's the 9th of an A chord. It's a B. But I also left those open strings, open A and the open B, for both of the chords. So I took an idea, a very simple idea. I utilized the open strings that I had and came out with something that sounded really nice. So just trying to be a little creative with some basic chords. I came up with something that you don't hear every day that sounds pretty cool. Like this is something I wrote a long time ago, but you can listen to a lot of people do this kind of thing. Listen to John Mayer. He's in his rhythm parts, he's always using open strings in different ways, and sometimes even changes the tuning a little bit too. And listen to a lot of solo acoustic guys that they'll take advantage of those open strings. And these two chords are in the show notes as well. Okay, my next chord is the 13th chord. So the 13th chord, it's a dominant chord. It's like a 7th chord. You know, you'll hear it in blues or jazz or something like that. And when I was getting better at blues, and I've been playing it for a long time, I started to get tired of playing the same old chords all the time, the same old 7th chords. I wanted something that had a little bit more color to it. So when you're playing 7th chords in blues, you know, that's fine and everything, but at some point you want a little bit more. So the 9th chord is usually the next step up from the 7th chord. And basically, you're adding the 1st, 3rd, 5th, flat 7th, and then adding the 9th, kind of like we did with an add 9 chord before. And that gives you something like this, like the James Brown chord. That kind of sound. That's a dominant 9th sound. That's usually where you go next when you're starting to want to branch out in the blues and get some other sounding chords. But then the next step from there is the 13th chord. And it's very different when you play it other than a regular 7th chord. It sounds very melodic. It sounds a little more jazzy. And it's a good sound to have in your bag of tricks. You know, it's a good sound to add to different songs. So how it's made is easy. It's super easy. If you play an A7th bar chord at the 5th fret, that's your first finger all the way across the 5th fret. It's second finger on the G string on the 6th fret, and your third finger on the A string on the 7th fret. Okay, so the regular old A7 bar chord at the 5th fret. And now what you're going to do is you're going to take that pinky that you're not using, you're going to add that to the B string on the 7th fret. Let's take a listen. Do you hear the difference? Here's the A7 chord, and here's the A13th chord. And there's another way of voicing that too, where you're not even playing the A string or the E string. It sounds like this. And a lot of jazz chords, they will always get rid of the 5, the 5th note. If in a chord you have 1, 3, 5, 7, that 5, that's the expendable ones. If you don't have enough strings to get done what you need to do, you can get rid of that. And technically, an A13th chord, you can have all of the extensions. You can have the 9th, the 11th, and the 13th in there, but you don't have to have them in there. You can omit those other two. If you don't understand this, don't worry about it. We'll get into it some other time. But you have to have the flat 7th in there for it to be a dominant chord, to be a 13th chord. Otherwise, it would sound like a 6th chord. I'm not going to go down that road. But there's another way you can play a 13th chord. That cool sound is you can take that A9, the James Brown chord, and add your pinky to the high E string up 2 frets. And you have an easy, instant 13th chord. Played in funk songs, played in blues songs, played even in rock songs sometimes. It's awesome. It's a really neat sound, and it really kind of gives a more complex sound to this to these dominant chords. You can play them in blues progressions, jazz, anywhere you have a dominant chord that you want to fancy up a little bit. And like I said, there's diagrams of both of those 13th chords that I talked about in the show notes page. Okay, the next chord, augmented and diminished chords. We've talked a little bit about these, and there's lots of ways to play these two chords. And augmented is usually described as a floating chord. They used to play it on the old soap operas when someone was dreaming. They play an augmented chord. And then diminished is tense. In the old black and white movies, when there's the guy, he's got the barbell mustache, and he's got the black cape on, and he's tying the lady to the railroad tracks, and the train's coming in. They would play those diminished chords for those kind of things. They're cool. They've got neat sounds. Something so kind of floating and something so tense. You can use them effectively in a lot of songs. Let's talk about how they're made. The augmented chord, I'm going to do an E augmented right there. All that is a regular old E chord. E, G sharp, B. And what you do is you raise the B. That's all it is. So here's a regular old. You hear the difference? Here's a regular old E. And we're going to take this note, which is a B. We're going to raise it up 1 fret. You hear out, it kind of feels like the bottom dropped out. Everything's kind of floating. Neat chord. Okay, let's talk about the diminished chord. The diminished chord is easy too. The diminished chord is a minor chord, just a regular old minor chord, and you take the fifth and lower it 1. So if you had, E minor, E, G, B, you make that B a B flat. Let's see here. Automatic diminished chord. But the thing is, the diminished triad's not used a whole lot. Usually you're hearing something called a diminished 7th chord. That's a minor 7th chord with a lowered 5th and a double flat 7, or a lowered dominant 7. So if you don't understand the theory stuff, we'll get into that later. But let me play you a diminished 7th chord. E diminished 7th. Okay? What's neat about these chords is they're both, the augmented and the diminished 7th, they're both called symmetrical chords. And what that does is it allows you to move them around a little bit. They repeat themselves across the fretboard. So if you take this chord, the diminished 7th, I'm playing this at the 5th fret. If I was to move it up 3 frets, we still have the same chord. It's all the same notes, just in a different order. And the fingering is exactly the same. I can move up another 3 frets. Same chord. Different voicing, same chord. I haven't changed my fingers at all other than sliding them up. How about another 3 frets? Neat chord. So that sound, you can get a lot of cool ideas from that. The augmented triad works the same way. So here's that E augmented. Okay, this one repeats itself every 4 frets. The same chord, E augmented, just in a different place, different voicing. There it is again. Oh, yeah, the frets get kind of skinny as you get up higher there. Those are all E augmented chords. All I did was take this fingering and move it up 4 frets at a time, and it just keeps playing the same chord in a different voicing. Very cool. Where would we use these chords? The diminished seventh is a great passing chord. There's your diminished right there. To a minor 7, to a 5 chord, back to the 1 chord. Diminished. In blues, you'll hear when it goes to the 4 chord, the next chord, right there, that's a diminished chord. It's kind of a passing chord. It takes you back to the 1 chord. Okay, diminished chords are great as passing chords in blues and jazz. In augmented chords, we've talked about this one before. You hear this as the beginnings and also the turnarounds of like old 50 songs. Right? And in blues songs too, you'll hear those. Very cool chords. I use them all the time, and they're easy. And head on over to the show notes page and check out some of the chord boxes. Okay, these next two are really cool and really different. Both of these chords are made of notes that most of us are very familiar with. And I use them a lot in conjunction with some scales that we all play a lot. The two chords we're going to talk about are the minor 11th chord and the 6/9 chord, which may mean nothing to you right now, but just give me a second. We're going to figure this out. The minor 11th chord, or some people call it a minor 7th add 11. I've always called it a minor 11th. It makes sense. It's kind of a dreamy sounding minor chord. I use it a lot here's one. So instead of using just a regular minor, if I wanted more of a dreamier sound, I'd use a minor 11th chord. But what's neat about a minor 11th chord is the notes that we need to use for it. So here's the notes in that chord. We have an A, which is a 1 chord, a C, which is the minor 3rd, an E, which is the 5th, a G, which is the flat 7th, okay? And then we have a D, okay, which is the 11th. That's the note that gives it that sound. That's different from the regular minor triad. So that's the 1, the flat 3, the 4, the 5, and the flat 7th. Well, I'll tell you, but some of you may know already, those are the same notes in the minor pentatonic scale. The one most people learn first. So the minor 11th chord it's got a little of a fusion sound, a little dreamy sound, but it's the same notes as the minor pentatonic. It's a really cool chord. How I'm playing this is at my first finger is on the B string at the 3rd fret. My pinky's on the G string at the 5th fret. My 3rd finger is on the D string at the 5th fret. And then my 2nd finger goes all the way to the 5th fret of the low E string. Okay, very nice. But what's neat about this chord is you can play it all over the place. Anywhere where you know there's a minor pentatonic pattern. Here's pattern 1 of the A minor pentatonic. Have you ever noticed that all the way across the 5th fret on the A minor pentatonic, you have your first finger is at the 5th fret on every string? Well, if you just press the barred straight across the 5th fret, there's a minor 11th chord. Okay, so if you're going... Anywhere where you can group some shapes from some of these patterns that you've already learned from minor pentatonic. They're all minor 11th chords. Pretty neat. They share the same notes. In the same way, the next chord that we're going to talk about uses the same ideas. This is called the 6-9 chord. It's a C6 chord. Let's see here. Am I doing a C? Yeah, I'll do a C6 chord, and we're going to add a 9th to it. Okay? Sounds like this. Pretty nice. Here's another one. Where I'm playing this is, I'm from top down on the high E string and the B string. I'm at the 8th fret with my 3rd finger across those two. And then my first finger bars at the 7th fret on the G, the D, and the A string. And then my second finger comes across and hits the C on the low E string. Okay? Now, where would I use this? I would use this in place of a major chord, especially like at the end of a song. If you got... For a neat ending, you know? And you'll hear those in lots of different ways using C6-9. But what's cool about it is just like the last chord, it shares some notes as well with another scale that we know, the major pentatonic scale. All of the notes. I'm doing C this time, and we have a C, a D, an E, a G, and an A. All those notes make up the C6-9 chord. Well, those happen to be the same exact notes in C major pentatonic. So anywhere where you have your scale pattern for the major pentatonic, you can group notes together, and they're going to be in that C6-9 chord, excuse me. Pretty neat. I always really like that sound. It sounds kind of Hendrixy when he would do this. You know, those kind of things there. So check both of those out, the minor 11th and the C6-9 on the show notes page. Okay, the last chord I want to talk about. This is one you probably all heard before. And they call it the Jimi Hendrix chord. It's a 7♯9 chord. It's awesome. It's a great use of a dominant chord, of a 7th chord. Sounds familiar, okay? It was in a lot of Jimi Hendrix songs, Purple Haze and Foxy Lay, all those kind of stuff. It has a very complex sound. And the reason why is it's not just a regular old 7th chord. It adds one note. And what that is, 1st, 3rd, 5th, flat 7th. Those are our regular notes. And it adds a sharp 9. Now, the sharp 9 is just the 9th note of scale raised up one. But that's also it's also a minor 3rd if you want to get into all that kind of stuff. We're not getting into that today. But what is cool about it, it adds a lot of tension. Here's 2 notes of the chord that I'm going to kind of feature without the rest of the notes. So here is right. That's the 3rd of the chord and this new sharp 9. They sound terrible. They're right next to each other. If you played the piano, you played a black key and a white key that were right next to each other. You get that kind of like south. That kind of south part kind of sounds terrible. It's terrible, right? But it's inside this chord. And another, if you take 2 of the other notes of the chord, that's a tritone. I think a long time ago, you'd hear like ambulances and things like that. Or police cars, they'd have that kind of a tritone sound. It's a very tense sound. So in this chord, we have some very tense sounds, but when you play all of the notes of the chord together, it works pretty nice. It's pretty nice. So where would you play this chord? You could play this in funk songs, those kind of things. You could use it as a turnaround in blues. You know, those kind of things in jazz, lots of different things. So that's my last favorite chord for today. I got a lot more, and we're going to get into those in another time. But please go over there. If you heard any of the chords that you like, go on over to playguitarpodcast.com/034, and all of these chords will be right there for you. Okay, so there they are. Some of my favorite chords of all time. What we did was we had an overview of the things you can do with chords. And then we took a look at the suspended fourth chord, the major add 9 chord, the minor add 9 chord, some major chords voiced with open strings, 13th chords, augmented chords, diminished chords, minor 11th chords, 6/9 chords, and the 7 sharp 9 Jimi Hendrix chords. So I hope you heard something different and got inspired to dive into your chords a little bit deeper. I thought it was fun bringing all this to you. If some of it was a little over your head, I don't worry about it. We'll get more into chords and those kind of things. But I just wanted to present these more than anything to you and see if you could try them on your own. And I suggest you do. It's a lot of fun, and it's in messing with chords and understanding chords. It's great for moving you forward with the guitar. So my question for you today is, what are some of your favorite chords to play? We would all love to hear from you. Let us know in the show notes. Like I said before, playguitarpodcast.com/034. We would all love to hear about it. This is listener feedback. This is where if you have a comment or a question that I can help you with, I will try my best to help you. To get in touch, you can always email me at feedback@playguitarpodcast.com. You can tweet at me at playguitarpdcst. Use the comments on the show notes page. Use the contact form on the site. I'm easy to get in touch with. Just get in touch with me. I'd really appreciate it. So I've been thinking. Had some wonderful, wonderful iTunes reviews. People say very nice things, and I say their name, and I don't say the last name, and I just say thank you for the review. But people are putting them up publicly. They're going out of the way to be nice. I'm going to read them on the air because, hey, if I left a review for somebody and I put it up there, I would think it was cool to hear it. You know, so I got a great one today from Jason Butcher 75. And he said, amazing podcast has really pushed me into becoming a much better guitarist. 5 stars. Well, thank you, Jason. Thank you very much. I'm going to do this from now on. So I will read your reviews on the show right here at this spot every week. So if you leave an iTunes review, I'm going to put it up there. Okay. So thank you, Jason. That was awesome. Also, I've got some great email this week from SV talking about practice schedules. I got a great message from Kevin L, building pentatonic scales from the full scales we talked about, and from Nathan M, just a great message. And we're talking about filling in the blanks in some playing. So thank you all for the wonderful emails. And our Facebook group this week. We have new members, Nate M, Lisa D, Dan W, Ben R, and Johan S. Thank you so much for joining our group. We're having so much fun. We've talked about Dream Gear this week. We got into some slow downer apps, being able to take Spotify, slow it down so we could learn the songs better. We're talking a little bit about, Andy was talking about fret. He did a fret level this week, which was awesome. I love doing that. That's my kind of how I decompress. I go out to my garage and work on guitars. And so that's a lot of fun, Andy. We talked about helping some players who are very new at guitar. We have a few of those. And also I did another live stream. I did it this Monday night. I couldn't get to it till Monday night, but we talked about frustrations, how to get good at the guitar. How long does it take to get good at guitar? Everybody's favorite question. We talked about strumming, and we talked about chord progressions for different styles and basics of modes. So thanks to everybody in the group. I really appreciate you being there. And if you aren't a member yet and you would like to join in, just go to playguitargroup.com. It'll take you right over there. And also don't forget about that free blues lesson that I have at freeblueslesson.com. Okay, we've gone long, so that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me today for the Play Guitar Podcast. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe to the show in iTunes or your podcast player or Apple Podcasts. Also, I'd really appreciate if you could leave an Apple Podcast review for the show. If you're interested in online lessons, go on over to playguitaracademy.com and join my early adopter list to get news on the opening of the site and an early adopter discount. Also, follow me on all of my different social media pages. Links to them are at www.playguitarpodcast.com. Thanks again, and I will see you on episode 35.